Okay, so have you ever wished you could just like level up your English vocabulary?
Like find those words that make you sound smarter.
Exactly. And get this, I found this podcast for English learners, and they claim that mastering just 15 words can make a huge difference.
15 words, huh? That's not so bad.
No, right. It's not about memorizing a dictionary. It's about choosing the right words. Powerful words,
I'm intrigued. Let's hear it.
So that's what we're doing in this deep dive. We're going beyond simple definitions to really get how to use these words.
Let's unlock some word power.
All right, word number 1 is meticulous.
Meticulous.
Yeah. I mean, like paying super close attention to detail, being really thorough and precise.
Oh, I see. So like a surgeon would need to be meticulous, right?
Exactly. Or like a watchmaker. Anyone doing delicate work.
But it doesn't have to be just like physical tasks. You could be meticulous in your research or in planning something.
True. It's about that attention to detail no matter what you're doing.
Makes sense.
The podcast used the example. The artist was meticulous when painting the tiny details of the portrait.
I can picture that.
But it makes me think, can you be too meticulous? Like, does it ever become a bad thing?
Interesting question. I guess in creative fields, maybe too much focus on the tiny details could stifle the big picture,
That's true. You need that balance.
Yeah, for sure.
Which actually leads us to word number 2, ambiguous.
Ambiguous. What does that one mean?
It basically means having more than one possible meaning, being open to interpretation, or even unclear.
Oh, okay. Like those movie endings that leave you wondering what just happened.
Exactly. Or like when you get instructions that are so ambiguous, you have no idea what to do.
The worst.
But there's a place for ambiguity in art, right? Like in poetry or music, it can be really powerful.
Definitely. It makes you think, it draws you in.
Yeah. The podcast gave the example. The movie's ending was ambiguous, leaving the audience with many questions.
I can see how that would spark discussion, make people analyze it.
For sure. Though sometimes I think those endings are just lazy writing.
Probably true sometimes. But the good uses of ambiguity, that's an art form.
Word number 3 is inevitable.
Inevitable. Like destined to happen.
Exactly. Like no matter what you do, it's gonna happen.
Like death and taxes.
Yeah, those are the classics.
But on a less morbid note, I guess some historical events might have felt inevitable looking back.
That's deep. The podcast went with, the team's victory was inevitable. They had been training hard all year.
So in that case, it's not so much about fate, but about putting in the work to make something happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Like you're setting yourself up for success.
Exactly.
Okay, the next word is prudent.
Prudent.
Yep. It means acting with care and thought for the future, not being reckless.
So basically being wise, making good choices.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like that voice in your head that says, maybe don't spend all your money on those shoes.
We all need that voice sometimes.
For real. The podcast said it's prudent to save money for emergencies.
Which, yeah, makes total sense. But how do you know when you're being prudent versus just not boring?
That's the thing, right? You don't want to be so careful you never take any chances.
There's got to be a balance somewhere.
Right. Word number 5 is eloquent.
Eloquent. Now that sounds fancy.
It is. It means being really fluent and persuasive in speaking or writing, like you have a way with words.
Ooh, okay. Think of those speakers who can just captivate a whole audience.
Yes. They make even the most complex topics sound interesting and engaging.
And you can be eloquent in writing too, right?
Absolutely. The podcast used her eloquent writing style, makes her books a joy to read.
That makes me think of like classic authors, the ones whose words just flow so beautifully.
So true. It's like the difference between just saying something and truly expressing it.
Eloquence is definitely a skill I'd love to master.
Me too. Though sometimes language is anything but eloquent, which brings us to obsolete.
Obsolete, like outdated.
Exactly. No longer used or needed, like think of floppy disks or cassette tapes.
Yeah, those are definitely obsolete. But I guess words can become obsolete too, right?
Totally. Slang from like decades ago would probably sound weird now.
Makes you wonder what words we use today will sound totally strange in the future.
Right. The podcast went with, CDs are becoming obsolete in the digital age.
True. Technology moves so fast, it makes things obsolete all the time.
Okay. Time for a deep one. Profound.
Profound, all right.
It's about something being deep and meaningful.
Yeah.
Having a big impact on you. Like when you hear a quote that just blows your mind.
Oh, yeah. Those moments where something just clicks and you see things differently.
Yes. the podcast used, her words had a profound effect on me.
I like that. It's like those profound moments can really stay with you, shape who you are.
For sure. All right, how about precarious? Think danger.
Precarious meaning,
It means not secure or safe, like being on shaky ground.
okay, like literally standing on a cliff edge.
Yes. Or, the podcast said, he was in a precarious financial situation.
So it can be physical, financial, or even emotional, right? Like a precarious relationship.
Exactly. A sense of instability.
Gotcha.
Now for a more positive word. Resonate.
Resonate. Okay, hit me with it.
It's like when something really speaks to you on a deep level. You connect with it emotionally, like a song that perfectly captures how you're feeling.
I love that, when something just clicks and you feel truly understood.
Yes. The podcast had the example. Her story resonated with me.
Makes sense. We all look for those connections, things that make us feel less alone.
Definitely. All right, time to get astute.
Astute, meaning,
It means being sharp, clever, quick to understand, like a detective solving a mystery.
ooh, an astute observation.
Exactly. The podcast said he's an astute businessman.
But I bet being astute is useful in any field, not just business.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
From science to art to just navigating everyday life, that sharpness is valuable.
Agreed.
Okay, this one's heartwarming.
Benevolent.
Benevolent. I'm getting good vibes from that word already. It means being kind and generous, wanting to do good for others. Think of people who volunteer their time or donate to charity.
Oh, I like that. Truly selfless and caring.
Right. The benevolent donor gave millions to charity.
Wow. Though I think benevolence can be small acts of kindness too, not just huge gestures.
You're so right. Every little bit counts.
Totally.
All right, now for a word that describes a lot of bad writing. Convoluted.
Convoluted. Is it what I think it is?
Probably. It means complicated and hard to understand. Like those explanations that just make you more confused.
Oh, I know those. Too many big words, too much jargon.
Exactly. The podcast just went with, his explanation was so convoluted I got lost.
Sometimes it feels like you need a map to follow those explanations.
Surreal.
But it's funny, right? Because sometimes people try to sound smart by being convoluted, but it backfires.
Totally. Clear and simple is usually better.
100%.
Okay, up next is surmise.
Surmise. Sounds like summarize, but I'm guessing it's different.
Good guess. It means to make an educated guess based on limited information. Like a detective piecing together clues.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just a random guess. There's some logic behind it.
Right. Like the podcast said, I can only surmise that she was late because of traffic.
So you're using what you know to fill in the gaps?
Exactly.
I like that.
All right, almost there. Word number 14 is adept.
Adept. That one sounds positive.
It is. It means skilled or proficient at something, like an expert. Think of athletes or musicians who've mastered their craft.
Ah, okay. Like she's adept at playing the piano.
Yes. The podcast went with, she's adept at solving puzzles.
Makes sense. But doesn't adeptness also go beyond specific skills? Like you could be adept at handling difficult situations or at learning new things quickly.
You're so right. It's a broader concept than just being good at one thing.
I'm definitely trying to be more adept at life in general.
Me too.
Yeah.
And last but not least, cynical.
Cynical. That one's a bit tricky.
Yeah, it can be a bit negative. It means distrustful of other people's motives, like you always expect the worst.
Ah, I see. Like I'm cynical about politicians and their promises.
Yeah, that's a classic example. The podcast used that one too.
Makes sense. But is there ever a time when being a little cynical is good? Like questioning things so you don't get fooled?
That's a good point. I think it's about finding that balance between being cautious and not becoming completely jaded.
Yeah, you don't want to lose all faith in humanity.
Definitely not. So there you have it. 15 words to level up your English game. What do you think?
Honestly, that was fascinating. I already feel smarter just knowing these words.
Me too. It's amazing how much power there is in language.
Absolutely. And it makes me realize there's always more to learn.
Totally. This is just the tip of the iceberg. 15 words down, and I feel like we've just started.
It's amazing how much depth there is to language, right?
Seriously. Like, I thought my vocabulary was okay, but now I'm realizing there's always more to learn.
That's the beauty of it. It's a lifelong journey.
It is. And it makes me think of that word adept. We were saying it's not just about skills, but also about, like, being open to growing.
Exactly. Being adept is about being a lifelong learner, always improving.
Which makes me wonder, do you think any of these 15 words will, like, become obsolete someday?
That's a good question. I mean, the podcast used the example, CDs are becoming obsolete. What if, like, eloquent becomes outdated.
Right. What if everyone's just communicating in emojis and memes in the future?
Uh-huh. Well, I think even if some specific words fade away, the ideas behind them will probably stick around.
Yeah, that's true. Like, even if we don't use the word eloquent anymore, being a good communicator will always be important.
Exactly. The core concept remains the same.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Wouldn't want all this vocabulary work to go to waste.
Definitely not. But I think the real takeaway is that it's not just about memorizing words, it's about understanding how to use them effectively.
So true. It's about nuance and, like, the subtle ways language can shape meaning.
Right.
Okay, so out of all these words, were there any that really stood out to you? Any that you're going to try to use more?
I think profound is one I really connect with. It's that idea of like encountering ideas that change the way you see things.
Ooh, I like that. Those moments that stick with you.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? Any favorites?
You know, I'm going to try to be more astute in my observations.
Oh, I love that. Like you're going to be a detective of language, picking up on all the little details.
Uh-huh. Exactly. And that kind of sums up what I love about this whole deep dive. It's about paying attention to the words we use.
Both when speaking and listening.
Yes.
Right.
It's like we've been given this toolkit of powerful words, and now we get to go out and use them.
I love that analogy.
Before we move on, I got to give a shout out to the podcast that inspired this episode. They go into way more detail on each word with examples and exercises and stuff. I'll link to it in the show notes.
That's awesome. Great resource for anyone who wants to dive even deeper.
But before we wrap up completely, I think we should leave our listeners with something to think about, like a final question to ponder.
Ooh, I like that idea. How about this? We've talked about how these words can elevate our English, but what about the bigger picture? How does language shape our thinking?
Whoa, that's deep.
Right. Does the language we speak actually influence the way we see the world?
I have to think about that one.
Me too. It's a question that's fascinated people for a long time, and it's one we can all keep exploring.
Yeah, it's like you said, it makes you realize words are more than just sounds,
Way more.
They're tools for understanding everything, like ourselves and the world around us.
Powerful tools, too.
That means we got to use them carefully, right?
Absolutely. It's like words can build things up or tear them down.
True. Inspire or discourage.
And I think that's a good reminder to be mindful of the words we choose. Not just for ourselves, but for the people we're talking to.
Yeah, like words have an impact.
For sure. They shape how we think and feel.
They even influence our actions sometimes.
It's true. So, yeah, let's all try to use our words wisely.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that about wraps up this deep dive into word power.
It does, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning for us,
I think you're right. There's so much more to explore with language.
Definitely. And I hope this has, inspired everyone listening to keep learning and playing with words.
Me too. Find those words that make you feel powerful.
Yes. And use them to make a difference in the world.
Love that.
Okay.
And hey, if you ever feel stuck, just remember those 15 words we talked about today.
They're a great starting point.
They are. All right, until next time, everyone, keep those vocabularies growing.
Happy wordsmithing.